here in such a nice, beautiful, and intimate setting. I hope what I show you today inspires you to think about the future and how we are going to be treating diabetes as well as preventing diabetes in the future. So, as you know, 1 out of 4 human beings has South Asian ancestry. Just let that hit you. That's 25% of the world's population. And of course, most of them live in the South Asian subcontinent, but the US has the largest part of the diaspora with over 5.5 million people from South Asia. And then you can see that, UAE and other areas are also growing in size. Yet there are very few studies that are longitudinal that really help us understand the mechanisms why people develop heart disease and diabetes at younger ages, more aggressive disease, and often more complications of their disease. So, with that background, we got funding to start the MASALA study in 2010. This is year 15, 16 of the study. It stands for Mediators of Atherosclerosis in South Asians Living in America. And we designed it to include South Asian Americans who are between age 40 and 84 years old. They could not already have cardiovascular disease. So if they'd had any kind of stents or imaging of their heart or arteries, they were not eligible. So if anything, Masala is looking at the rosiest picture because they were excluded if they already had a heart attack or stroke to be in the study. We currently have 3 sites for Masala, UCSF, where I am, and then Northwestern in Chicago, and New York University is our newest site. This is the only longitudinal cohort of US South Asians to date. And we purposely designed Masala to be parallel in methods to an ongoing study called the Multi-Ethnic Study of Atherosclerosis, MESA. And why this is important is MESA was already running and had included 4 different US population groups. And I'm showing you the same color theme will be shown in future slides when I compare our South Asians in Masala to whites, Black Americans, Hispanic, and Chinese. It was really important to do this study not only because this linkage is important so we can cross-compare valid measures across these 2 studies, the same inclusion criteria, the same assays, the same reading centers, but also it was the only way we could get the study funded because I tried 5 times to get a South Asian only cohort funded and no dice. But having the leverage of, oh, we're going to compare to other US population groups was exciting and, more important for reviewers. So what have we done in Masala over the last 15 years? We have expanded our cohort. We started with original 906. We got some philanthropy funding to increase the size in our second exam. And we recently doubled the size of our cohort with new grant funding. So now the current size of Masala is over 2,300 South Asians. We have seen the original cohort 3 times, so it's a longitudinal study. It's not a hello, goodbye, one-time study that exists all around the world. This is actually seeing people every 5 years, but getting their data every single year, which requires a lot of follow-up and annual commitment to be in the study. Wave 1 consisted of mostly Indian immigrants. About 85% of the population were Indian immigrants. Wave 2, Wave B over here, is exclusively Pakistani and Bangladeshi. And we did this on purpose because we've seen data from the UK and Canada and from those regions in South Asia that there are differences in the risk profile. And it's very important to know where are the risks, where are the disparities, what can we do to improve health. So, that's hard to see on this white background, but the people in our study, 42% were born in India, 25% in Pakistan, 26% in Bangladesh, and then you can see there's other representation. Only 2% were born in the United States, and that's because of the age of inclusion, 40 to 84. So people had immigrated here in the 60s and 70s and started having kids who were old enough to participate. So we can't really say much about the second generation of Indians, but we're building on our study now and starting a new second generation study. So what have we found in terms of the diabetes prevalence? I'm showing you the original cohort because these are the published data from the mostly Indian cohorts that we had started in 2010. The first bar graph shows you in red that the overall prevalence of diabetes was 25%. Pre-diabetes, about a third. And you can see for men and women, there's a big difference. Men have a lot more diabetes than women, and this is true around the world in any population. There's a gender difference of diabetes. And then when we compare to MESA, again, our sister study designed to be comparable, this is what we see. Orange is the color for the South Asians, and then the other four groups in MESA are in the different colors. And this is unadjusted crude prevalence rates. You'll say, why is it not 26? You're showing me 26 on the left. That's because MESA did not do the 2-hour glucose tolerance test that we did in MASALA. So we removed that test when we compared to MESA to, again, compare apples to apples. So 21% of South Asians had diabetes compared to 14% Hispanic, 13% Black. When we adjusted for the kitchen sink, by this I mean statistical adjustment for things like socioeconomic status, exercise, body mass index, waist circumference, HDL, hypertension, metabolic risk factors, we only exaggerated the difference between the groups, right? So this is the issue. There's a lot of diabetes in South Asians. We know that, and we confirm that in Masala. South Asians are not a monolith, and that's why I started out by saying that we needed more data in other South Asian groups, and this is what we've just accomplished, completing that second wave B of Pakistani and Bangladeshi inclusion, and look at the difference between these three South Asian American immigrant groups. Bangladeshis, 1 out of 2 Bangladeshi adults have diabetes. That is on the order of what you see in Pima Indians in the United States and other Native American groups. 42% of Pakistanis have diabetes compared to 24% of Indians. So I already showed you the Indians in the original study compared to the US groups are high risk, but look at this. So we have our work cut out to really, do more to prevent disease and poor outcomes in groups that are most affected. So this is why we're here. Why and how do we prevent this? And this is kind of just a simplistic way of thinking about the multi-levels of risk factors that cause diabetes and what's modifiable and what's not. So starting at the bottom, there are structural and environmental factors. Where you live, where you work, where you play matters. The green space matters, the air pollution matters, the water pollution matters, all of that socioeconomic structural factors matter. They are modifiable, but it takes major policy changes to modify those. Health behaviors, that's the individual level factors. Diet, exercise, sleep, what you're using in terms of substances, stress levels, all that. Then there is other biological factors such as ectopic fat, where your fat is stored in your body and the amount of insulin resistance you have. Believe it or not, that is modifiable too. Then there's beta cell dysfunction. This is your pancreas. The beta cells are the insulin producing cells that you were born with. That is genetically determined, but also environmentally shaped and modifiable. Then there's in utero factors, factors of the fetal environment and the mother's health and what the mother was exposed to and what that does in terms of priming the fetus to later go on to develop hypertension, diabetes, obesity. And lastly is the genetic factors, not modifiable, unfortunately, but everything else is modifiable. So I'm going to show you some of our most recent data, just touching on some of these factors where we are. So Dr. Meghna Gadgil in the back is my long-term collaborator, and she led our dietary studies within MASALA. For diet measurement, it's very difficult because imagine the differences in diet from north to south to east to west in India. How do you measure that in a study that can be reproducible and done over and over again? We used a food frequency questionnaire that has 164 items. It was developed in South Asians in Canada, And this was asking people all sorts of different food intake, including US, mixed Western foods. And Dr. Gadgil did this analysis looking at what dietary patterns people eat. People eat in patterns. They don't eat in terms of macronutrients, right? We don't think of how much protein are you eating today, or it's like, what kind of diet do you eat? And these are the three predominant dietary patterns in our original Masala population of mostly Indians. One was a pattern rich in animal protein. It included a lot of Western foods like alcohol, coffee, eggs, fish, pasta, pizza, etc. The second was a mostly vegetarian, traditional South Asian diet that was rich in fried snacks, sweets, and high fat dairy products. You can read those and you can see the beautiful pictures. We're all very familiar with these foods. And then the third is a more prudent vegetarian style diet, which is rich in fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. And what she found in this study was that eating more of this animal protein predominant diet was associated with higher levels of total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, waist circumference, and weight, and also more fat in the liver. Eating that predominantly South Asian traditional vegetarian diet was associated with insulin resistance as well as low HDL cholesterol, what was felt to be at the time a protective cholesterol. And then the diet on the right was the healthier diet with lower rates of hypertension and metabolic syndrome. So we dug a little deeper because 40% of the people in Masala were lifelong vegetarians. We really wanted to look at this, plant-based diet and what's going on. So Dr. Bhupitaraju, who's at the Harvard School of Public Health, led this analysis from our data, where she categorized healthy plant-based foods on the left, whole grains, fresh fruits, and less healthy. We won't call them unhealthy, we'll call them less healthy. Refined grains, fruit juices, potatoes, so the starchy and more high glycemic foods there. And this is what she found. And when you correlate how many healthy plant-based foods you're eating and how many less healthy, showing the healthy in the green bubbles, we found that people eating a diet that was high in healthy plant-based foods had lower odds of fatty liver, lower obesity and overweight, and lower incidence of developing diabetes within 5 years. Whereas people eating a diet that had more of the less healthy plant-based foods, you could see there's no strong association because everything crosses that line of unity, but there is kind of a little bit of an inkling of higher incidence of diabetes. So we do have some good data showing that we need to go beyond just asking people what type of diet they eat. And then if you see someone has a vegetarian diet, okay, great, let's move on. No, we actually need to dig a little deeper and really try to work with our nutrition colleagues as well as health coaches to modify the diets. So let's talk about body composition. So in Masala, we categorize people based on their BMI. This is what doctors do in the office. So we, of course, use the poor proxy measure of BMI. But we used an Asian cut point for this, which not everybody is using clinically, but should be. So a normal BMI for Asians is less than 23. For overweight is 23 to 27.4, and obese is 27.5 or higher. And you can see in the orange is Masala, and about 25% of the cohort was in that normal BMI range. And there's a big spread with the Chinese having, almost half were in the normal BMI, and very few of the Hispanic, less than 20%, were normal. And why I want to focus on that normal weight group is because that is the group that is currently not indicated to undergo diabetes screening per the US guidelines for diabetes. Thank you so much. So we wanted to look at that group of normal weight individuals shown in the left panel. And what I'm showing in red dots are people with metabolic abnormalities. So that's high glucose, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, or low HDL. And you can see the South Asian group is that last set of bubbles, that almost 50% of the South Asians in the normal weight group have metabolic abnormalities. It does exist in all the other groups as well, but it's just lower in risk. So, if we're using BMI and we're stuck with using BMI in the clinical sense because there is no other easy measure that can be done on the go every time you meet, what may be a relatively healthy BMI for South Asians? So, using the same data, if we use the benchmark of whites at a BMI of 25, what the prevalence of metabolic abnormalities is, our BMI equivalent is 19.6. That is really low. Okay. And that is something very hard for, physicians, clinicians to say, you need to get your BMI under 19.6. But what this all tells me is that using BMI for screening for diabetes is insane because we miss most people who may have diabetes, and we miss the period of time early in diabetes where you can actually make a difference and have diabetes go into remission. So we should not be using BMI for screening. We are working hard to try to change these guidelines in the US. So, what is going on with this low BMI in South Asians having metabolic abnormalities? And so, we use CT scans in MASALA, and we use the same kind of methodology as MESA to measure where fat is stored: fat around the heart, fat in the muscle, fat in the liver, and fat in the visceral adipose tissue. And what we found comparing, again, our South Asians in orange to the MESA groups is that unfortunately South Asians do have a predisposition to storing fat in the wrong areas. So up top is liver fat attenuation, which is an inverse sign. So if you have low hepatic attenuation, you have a lot of fat in the liver. So South Asians predominantly had higher fatty liver compared to the other groups, more visceral fat, and more fat in the muscle compared to the other groups, and also low lean muscle mass. So that's the other side of the coin. Not only is it about where you put fat, which is genetically determined, but also where there is less lean muscle mass, and that's the engine to help utilize glucose in the bloodstream. So having low muscle mass is another major problem. So we looked at people without diabetes in Masala to understand what is going on. Why is there this high risk? And what we found is in the orange, compared to the MESA groups across the ages that we have in Masala, that there's a higher level of insulin resistance. And we've heard about this since the 1980s. We've heard about this from studies in the UK. But what we have not heard about is that there's lower beta cell function starting actually very early in life. And so in Masala, all of these people don't have diabetes, and they have lower beta cell function compared to all four groups in MESA. So that is, if you have poor beta cell function and the beta cell is not able to produce the insulin you need to overcome insulin resistance, you're going to end up with diabetes faster. So we've gone further in our understanding of type 2 diabetes. When I was in medical school in 1990, we knew there were two main types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2, and then there were these uncommon types, MODY, LADA. Now we know a lot more about type 2 diabetes. That's the predominant form of diabetes in the world. About 90% of diabetes is type 2, but we can actually now look at subtypes of type 2, talk about precision medicine, right? And so we can use clinical factors to decide and figure out where people fall in terms of the subtype of type 2 diabetes. And this is work that started in the late, 2018. So we did this with our Masala and Mesa people with diabetes, and we clustered their data, and we found five main clusters. There's an older age at onset form of diabetes in blue. Then the second cluster was a severe insulin deficiency type, which manifested with high levels of glucose. And then the third was a severe obesity with insulin resistance. And then there was a fourth, less common one where people in type 2 diabetes were already using insulin, had burnt out their pancreas, and then a very rare, very young age at onset type. And here's the five groups again: MESA groups, and then Masala over here. I'll have you look at the South Asians and how different the South Asians are from the Chinese in MESA in terms of subtype. I told you the most common subtype across all groups was the older age at onset diabetes. It's the least common here in South Asians. We have the insulin deficient subtype of diabetes. And I showed you again back in that chart with that low level of pancreatic beta cell function. That is the predominant subtype of type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance is actually not that common, and we need to move away from our thinking of all insulin resistance being the paradigm of diabetes. It is more common in whites and in Blacks and Latinos, but again, this insulin secretion problem is predominant. And why is that important? Turns out that you have very different outcomes based on the subtype of type 2 diabetes. People in the insulin deficient, that orange where South Asians fall, they have the highest incidence of developing atherosclerosis with coronary artery calcium, higher than all of these other types. So we should be managing these people clinically with the newest agents that prevent atherosclerosis and prevent heart disease. We shouldn't be using older agents that don't work as well, such as metformin and the sulfonylureas. Older age at onset, 29% had this. This is the least aggressive form of diabetes that people get after like age 70. We should leave these people alone. They are not going to end up with, no, we really should. We shouldn't be preventing diabetes in the 70-year-olds. You're wasting resources, honestly, because they are not going to end up having kidney disease, heart disease, retinal disease. And we need to not aggressively treat them because you may cause more harm by causing people to have low blood sugar, fall, fracture, die. So we need to let these people go, let them live. And then there's that insulin resistance, and I'm putting this at the bottom because it's third most common, really trying to drive this home. It's not insulin resistance. They don't have any higher rates of kidney disease or atherosclerosis, at least in the first 5 to 10 years of follow-up. And these people can be treated more with weight loss and other remedies to, to help their insulin resistance. I want to show you brand new data that just came out of India last week from my friend Venkat Narayan, who runs the Chennai and New Delhi CARS cohort. And what they did is the same type of subtyping, like I've just been showing you. It's been done in populations around the world. But they did this not only for people with diabetes, they did this for people with pre-diabetes. And so they had 14,000 patients in CARS. And what they did is they looked at who went on to die. And you can see the subtypes of type 2 diabetes. They had the severe insulin deficient subtype, 23%, mild insulin deficient, 54%, and then the insulin resistant subtype. And in the pre-diabetes group, it was insulin deficient or insulin resistant. And what they found was, in terms of who died more often or the higher risk of dying of any cause or of cardiovascular disease, was highest in the severely insulin deficient subtype. In fact, they had 18 years excess years of life lost in insulin deficiency subtypes. That goes back to what we found with more atherosclerosis in that subtype. So what are we doing? Why are we only focused on the obesity issue? We've got a real problem with the insulin deficiency subtype. And in genetic studies that have been done, mostly using data that comes from the UK, which is higher in Bangladeshis and Pakistani, very few Indians, there is a beta cell problem that leads to diabetes, as well as this ectopic fat distribution problem that leads to diabetes. So there's a genetic basis of both of these things. I'm going to stop with the final slide here. So what are we learning in MASALA in terms of diabetes? I think what we've learned is changing the paradigm of how we think about diabetes, with it being more of a beta cell impairment problem. The diabetes prevention tools we have, weight loss and exercise, they're great, but may not be right for preventing diabetes that is insulin deficient. We may need to rethink how we're doing prevention to have the best effect. And we may have a longer time to intervene on this type of diabetes, and we will get bigger benefits in cardiovascular disease prevention. It is so important that we have representation of South Asians in studies, and this is a problem around the world. We just don't have people volunteering to be in long-term studies. We need to disaggregate data, otherwise we lose the fact that there's big differences among South Asians, and we need to be able to compare across other populations to see the whole picture. So with that, I really want to thank you for your attention and our funders. These are the team. These are my people who make things happen for MASALA. Thanks so much. Do I have time for a question?
Thank you so much. We can stand together maybe. We can answer some questions. So anyways, thank you so much for shining light on the risk factors that we have, and this was some food for thought. So one question that I wanted to ask, that since your research shows that diabetes is rooted in early beta cell dysfunction rather than just weight, standard weight loss advice is not enough. How should lifestyle or dietary interventions change to specifically support beta cell function?
Yeah, no, that's a key question here because we don't have a whole lot of data to know because the people who've been enrolled in diabetes prevention trials that have been done around the world are mostly obese. And so we don't have data in the non-obese, normal weight persons to say, well, how do we prevent diabetes? Because you don't tell someone with a BMI of 20, go and lose weight. So, but there are factors that matter in terms of your dietary intake, and that those that cause glucose spikes, right? And so you want to have a lower glycemic load and a lower glycemic index diet. So I think diet matters. I think early changes in diet, as well as other factors that could put stress on the pancreas, will matter. This is an early kind of phase of understanding of how to prevent diabetes in this subtype. The what we know about this subtype is, even though it's very common, if you add the stress of obesity or extra pounds on in those ectopic areas, that's going to push you over. So you do want to maintain a healthy weight if you have already, poorly functioning beta cells.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if anybody in the audience had any questions. Here's
Yeah, I'm Dr. KRS. Yeah, I have been doing research in this particular area extensively. What is the component from the mitochondrial, from the mother to daughter, etc., versus men? Is there any way you can distinguish what the effects are?
Yeah, we're hoping to have whole genome sequencing as well as epigenetic data in MASALA soon. We have a pending grant. Let me tell you, we have 5 pending grants right now to keep MASALA funded and do new things, kind of moving in different ways. And the molecular basis of disease is very important. So we're hoping we get some of that funding.
I'll be glad to discuss in detail.
Yeah.
Another important one is the brain neural network to gut biomicrobe neural network. The communication, I have research program that I want to do, either in a university or a research lab, etc., where I want to be able to decode the communication that happens. Would that give any indication of when people eat, what, etc., etc.?
Yeah.
And we can embed the sensors and all of that as required.
Yeah, that's an exciting area. I've seen a lot of new research starting to come out with fMRI and other MRI usage and
I have
understanding.
in MRI also.
Yeah,
we can talk about it.
not in South Asians though, but in other populations.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Just a couple of questions. One is, you said that you excluded cardiovascular people with already having a heart attack or something like that. And is there any reason for that? And then second is, are you comparing your data with the South Asian studies that are done in India or other countries to just see what is the kind of a comparison?
Great question. So the reason we excluded people with cardiovascular disease is because we wanted to be similar in methods and measures to the MESA study. And MESA had that. And the point of this study is to really understand why people develop heart disease. So if you have people who have already had heart disease, they've already started taking different medications, maybe changing their lifestyle behaviors like they should. And so you don't get that same ability to say, well, what caused their disease? So and that's why I want everything you hear about MASALA, you should think this is the rosiest scenario, that people who already had heart attacks are not included. So even with that, I mean, it's astounding to see the rates of diabetes the way it is. Second question, yes, we've done several studies comparing our MASALA population with the CARS cohort, because we both these studies started at the exact same time in 2010. What we found is very interesting. Compared to old data from the UK, that brought up like, oh my God, there's so much diabetes in South Asians living in the UK, and it was like canary in the coal mine because there was very little diabetes back home in India or Pakistan. What we're seeing is the opposite. There's more diabetes in India. There's less diabetes in the immigrants in Masala, and there's more pre-diabetes here than in India. So that is like, wow, that whole reversal has started to happen where there's now India is ground zero for the diabetes epidemic, just exploding. And that's only in two states. I mean, two cities, Chennai and Delhi. There's new data from all 28 states in India that show the prevalence of diabetes is astoundingly high, even in rural areas of India.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh.
Thank you. Dr. Zimmerman. Yep, sorry. 2 more minutes?
Hi,
Okay.
very quickly.
Go ahead.
Hi, Nalini. Thank you so much. I'm Sri Srinivasan, visiting from New York. Finally, great to see
Yeah, nice
the
to meet you.
Masala
Yeah.
folks here in person. We hear all the great work that's happening on the West Coast. I run a new Substack called My Pre-Diabetic Life in partnership with Arogya.
Oh, wow.
And I've been told every Indian is actually pre-diabetic to begin with. So
Yeah,
that's not that special.
unfortunately.
But your stats are so interesting. Can you just very quickly tell us two things? One is what is the Chinese diet that Americans have always said makes you feel lighter after you eat, all those stereotypes?
Yeah.
Is any of that true? Is that why the Chinese numbers are theoretically better? Second is the stunning stats on the Bangladeshi community
Yeah.
and the Pakistani community.
Yeah.
How much of that is because on the economic ladder, there is a difference where when
Yes.
Indians came in the 60s versus the people coming now?
You're
So
right.
thank
You're
you.
right. Great questions. Wow. I'm here all day, so I'm happy to do offline and we can talk more. So the first question was Chinese diet. So MESA used a multi-ethnic dietary instrument, which wasn't great for the Chinese ethnic foods. Like our instrument for diet was South Asian specific, developed in South Asians in Canada. Their instrument had a few Chinese dishes, so I don't think, Meghna, I don't think we can really understand the Chinese diet with what they did. But my understanding overall of the data coming from China is that there's a mixed diet with a lot of carbs, and carbs including rice and other vegetables, but there's also a growing animal protein intake in the diet. So I can't tell you from MESA why. I don't think diet is the difference between the groups. Second question, remind me again. Bangladeshi. Oh, yes. Yes. So many differences in the Bangladeshi immigrants, Pakistani immigrants, and Indian immigrants. Actually, the decade of immigration is very different. The average decade is in the 80s for the Indians. It's in the late 90s for the Pakistani, and it's in the 2000s, post 9/11 for the Bangladeshis. Very different socioeconomic backgrounds, very different occupational backgrounds, very different diet. So looking at diet differences, Meghna has started to do this. I mean, I told you that 38% of the mostly Indians in our first wave of masala were lifelong vegetarians. 2% of Pakistani are vegetarian, and 0.6% of Bangladeshis are vegetarian. I'm not saying it's all the meat or it's not all necessary, but there's differences, right? So we are now spending a lot of time and energy to understand the differences by structural factors, socioeconomic factors, dietary, lifestyle. I mean, people from Bangladesh are living in multi-generational households, working 2 to 3 jobs, and there's a lot of stress in that lifestyle. And so stress levels, sleep, there's going to be a lot of differences. I don't think there's genetic differences explaining this huge difference in diabetes. This is going to be social, behavioral, structural differences.
So sorry. Alka, Arogya World, we do diabetes prevention through healthy living in India, and now we're bringing the programs to the US. All our stuff is science-based, all our stuff is behavior change science-based. So we are making some,
Great.
having some traction. Question for you. We go after general population level advice. Okay, we go to the community, we go to schools, we go to workplaces. We are in the community telling people, eat right, exercise, and avoid tobacco. That's what we do.
Great.
Okay, is that wrong? Because now
No.
you have subtypes,
Yeah.
and you're telling me South Asians don't even respond to
Yeah.
exercise and diet
Yeah.
to the same extent as
They don't.
other Americans.
They don't.
So, and you said the jury is out,
The jury is out.
basically,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
whether exercise and diet. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we've spent 15 years. We were formed in the same year
No.
as the start of Masala. 15 years
Yeah,
teaching
see,
people to eat right and exercise.
and that's why we need data like Masala to really understand what are we doing? Are we really doing anything that's benefit? Because the Indian Diabetes Prevention Program actually found only half the benefit of lifestyle to the diabetes prevention program in the US and Finland and Mexico. So there was a signal there that it's not working in Indians already, right? With the Indian diabetes, and we're just showing why here. So
Sorry, on that point,
yeah.
my take home was, hey, the pressure on Indians, the genetic pressure and the other, things are non-modifiable. You gave us 8 factors that are modifiable. But there's so much pressure on us that we have to actually run
Right.
to stand in place.
Right.
We have to do more exercise.
Yes.
More
Yes, exactly.
diet.
Yeah, and I think the thing is it has to start earlier in life because the beta cells are burning out. They're low at birth, and they are so any additional stress that you give by the food you eat, the non-exercise. I mean, exercise is low-hanging fruit, okay? Starting exercise in childhood and diet and other lifestyle behaviors so that the pancreas, the beta cell function doesn't collapse. That's where we need to go is don't prevent diabetes in the 60, 70-year-olds. Move to the 10, 15, 20-year-olds.
Last question. Sorry, last question. Dinesh Beradipur from Saratoga. Very, very interesting talk.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So one question is, so the people who were enrolled in this study, right, when you told them, hey, this is what we have found about you,
Yeah.
did they, over the course of time, make changes in their lifestyle?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So we've remeasured diet, we've remeasured physical activity with questionnaires over time. There has been some change, actually. There has been positive changes, and that's good if people are learning the lessons. I know that the data from the Bay Area has also improved because of programs like Anita's and South Asian Heart Center that's reaching many more South Asians where people are getting interested and learning and and improving lifestyle habits. So 10, 20 years ago, the rates of South Asian heart disease in the Bay Area were higher than they are now. So I do think that there is change happening, and it's going to take a lot of effort and dissemination of this. And we're in a very wealthy part of the United States. So if people don't hear the message here, they're not going to hear it anywhere. So let's use our microphones all around.